This is your home for St. Cloud State hockey, keeping you up to date on the NCHC.
One-timer coming, they score! Ripped in! A bomb from Permix!
Women's WCHA.
So Dana Rasmussen fires and she scores! Dana Rasmussen for the Huskies alongside
The National Hockey League.
Dwayne Kaprizov in for a chance to win it! He scores! Kirill, the thrill is for real! Welcome to the NHL, a game winner!
And everything from the state of hockey.
St. Cloud Cathedral is now 42.6 seconds away from wrapping up the school's first ever title.
Welcome to the Huskies Warming House Podcast Den. Episode number 57 of the Huskies Warming House Podcast. I'm Noah Grant, joined alongside my co-host and Nick Maxon. Nick, today is the day it's part of the job. It's one of those days that you don't want to be part of the job, unfortunately. But at the same time, there's a lot of really great things to reflect on here from St. Cloud State and their Frozen Four appearance here, making it to the first national championship game in school history. We're going to dissect all of that pretty much throughout the entire portion of the show. We will still have the Huskies Illustrated Weekly Roundup, pretty abbreviated section for about maybe 3 or 4 minutes, just to kind of wrap you up on what we've missed for the past 2 weeks as far as storylines are concerned. A quick housekeeping thing to kind of note here before I bring you into the show, Nick. We will have Dave Starman coming to record with us tomorrow night. I'm going to anticipate that interview. It'll be pretty short, about half an hour. We might release that a little bit later in the week, and that is because we're not going to be here next week. I'm working a tournament for hockey here in Minot, and we're just going to take a week off in general as it is, just with the timing with the end of the season. So we want to make sure we're giving listeners some content, and that's kind of the reason for the scheduling that we're going to have this week. With that being said, Nick, welcoming you into the show in a very groggy state. I should say very groggy, but I mean, let's be real. You had a very quick turnaround. Can you give listeners kind of an inkling of, your schedule, kind of, where you've been over the past maybe 12 hours, and how was Pittsburgh, man?
First of all, the hell if I knew where the hell I am right now. No, I'm kidding. Yes, it was a quick turnaround. Game got over, 9:30, 10 o'clock. It was pouring rain. So leaving PPG Paints Arena in a full suit and carrying a camera bag, a tripod, and my laptop bag, it was like
Not
just
fun.
salt. It was just salt in the wound, honestly, at that point. But then quick turn, like you mentioned, I got back to the hotel, got things together. And by the time I did that, it was about midnight. My wake up call was 4 o'clock in the morning. And I think there's just some general anxiety because I am working this evening that I didn't want to miss my flight. And so I didn't really sleep per se. So I got to the Pittsburgh airport at 4:45 a.m. By connection out of Chicago Midway, now back here in Minneapolis. And thank goodness that I was able to finally, for those of you who follow me on Twitter, the Caribou Coffee that's in the Humphrey Terminal 2, was not open.
Oh, no.
So it was not good, but there's plenty of other locations, so we got it. But, overall, I mean, fantastic tournament. The city of Pittsburgh at their hosts were fantastic, from the arena staff to the hotel, people, and obviously a lot of fans, meeting some other people out there as well. It just made the whole experience incredibly enjoyable, despite what we're going to dissect a little bit, despite the outcome of last night's game.
Yeah, we're gonna kind of jump in and kind of peel the Band-Aid off pretty quickly here and talk about that championship game right away here, because there are some points that they do need to be made, and we would be remiss, I think, if we didn't dissect the last hockey game for St. Cloud State in quite a while until we come back in the fall here, provided they still let us on the airwaves. One of the questions I got from one of my buddies, because it was a game that, unfortunately really took off at the tail end of that second period there. I got asked a pretty interesting question, Nick, and it was a simple question. Did you cry? I didn't cry when they scored that power play goal in the fourth one in the tail end of the second. I teared up a little bit. I'm not normally an emotional guy, for as soft as I am, but that was just one of those where you just kind of knew. And to put some salt in the wound for those who are watching the YouTube channel, this Frozen Four shirt that I got from the university, it showed up 10 minutes after the game. So that was a little bit more salt in the wound too. I still got some Frozen Four apparel coming. I'm excited for that. So, Nick, to reflect just a little bit before we jump into the actual game, obviously pretty bummed, right? I know you and I both kind of talked about this. We're pretty bummed at the result. But I kind of took a late night drive and, tried to clear my head a little bit. Cause I mean, it's one thing when you and I, we've been invested with this group for, 15 months here and, kind of tried to follow them through and, just taking stock of where we are, from just going back and looking back in July to just having a season, to just getting a chance to talk to these players. Never in our wildest dreams did we think that we get to cover a Frozen Four, yet alone a national championship game. So many strides to really look back on, and we'll touch on that as well. But, moving into the game, and that's where I was trying to go with this here. The one thing that I think you and I would really like to point out here is that a lot of people kind of have this inkling that the Huskies didn't show up, didn't play for 60 minutes. In the middle half of the game, the Huskies lost their mojo. They lost their jump. There's no doubt about that. The Huskies showed up to play yesterday. I think that's one thing that we really want to touch on here. St. Cloud State, if you want to pick a worse time for the hockey guys to stop smiling on this university, that was last night in the first period. Obviously, Vietti Miettinen hit the crossbar there. A really tough bounce on the first goal. Those things happen. Two defensemen running into each other, and David Renick still almost actually made that save. Even if you kind of knew it was coming there. I don't want to lay a lot of stock into the officiating, but there's two moments that I kind of want to point out that I think are actually three that are kind of important here. And again, the officiating did not make that hockey game. I don't want to take anything away from UMass. They're a hell of a program, very, very well coached and very well deserving of their national championship. I just want to say, if St. Cloud plays that team 10 more times, it's a 1 or 2 goal hockey game all 10 of those times. It is not a 5-0 hockey game. And so going back through the game, Nick, the three moments in the game that I thought officiating really could have made a difference here. Number one, the Huskies are on the power play with about 40 seconds left on their power play. And whoever it was for UMass, I can't remember who it was, grabbed the puck and threw the puck down the ice, and it's just, would it have made a difference? I don't know. The Huskies power play looked a little tough last night. But a 5-on-3 is a 5-on-3. Let's be real. And the Huskies were really generating. They were really pressing. And they were the better team in the first period. And it's really weird, difficult to go through those momentum shifts when you're the better team in the first period. And all of a sudden you look around, you're down 2-0. That second goal, Nick, that's the one that I thought was a real backbreaker, even though it was only the first period, because when you miss an offside call like that in that big of stage, when the Huskies, they responded okay after that first goal, and then you get that dagger with about 1:20 left at the tail end of the first period. That's another huge momentum shift. And then, the Huskies try to claw their way back in the second. Really nice move by the UMass player to make it 3-0. And the Huskies, that's kind of where they really have to start to press. And that too many men call was a little bit weak for me. And obviously UMass very capitalized on that one. So Nick, I kind of want to get your perspective on the game here. I think, like I said, I just want to talk to Huskies fans and just say St. Cloud showed up to play yesterday, but they looked really poor at the tail end of the game simply because those momentum shifts in that first half of the game were so huge that it was so difficult to mentally recover from them. And you know what? When UMass finally found their legs at the tail end of the second period, the train was rolling and it just never stopped. So,
first of all, we'll start from the beginning, right? St. Cloud not only was controlling the puck in the offensive zone, they were winning the board battles. If there was, sort of that one area that UMass was slated to be the better team was on the wall. Mm-hmm. And I really thought that St. Cloud took that to them in the first 8 minutes. And as I was tweeting yesterday, and obviously thank you to the fans that are following, I had mentioned towards the end of the game that what if Miettinen shot us 1 inch further down and that puck goes in? What does that do to the momentum of that hockey game? And, as players, Noah, and, when you see those two defensemen collide and you give up a 2-on-0, there's giving up a goal and there's giving up that type of goal, right? It just sometimes those kinds of goofy bounces, especially early, you don't want to say that, you're looking at a crystal ball, but it sometimes provides you a little bit of an insight into maybe where those bounces are going to go. And it just kind of felt like the Huskies were going to be on the short end of the stick. And we ended up seeing that, right? I just don't think that the Huskies after that really were able to settle back down and settle into their game. I just never really saw it offensively. And like you said, let's credit UMass. The 2 forecheckers against RD gave us nightmares all night. And, I made it a point too that the defensemen, you said urgency, I said they've got to make smart plays. To me, UMass was taking away that one breakout pass. They had the other side, and instead of skating out, they wanted to stretch it. And I get it. One of the ways you can counteract a forecheck like that, especially is that they were pressing. I know what the Flying Finland, they were pressing all 3 forwards at the red line from up in the press box. So they were really just trying to back them off. The problem was that the defensemen weren't taking the ice in front of them that was there. It's like, if there wasn't a pat, we'll skate it, right? So there were a couple of, I suppose you could say, just things that they just probably weren't really used to stylistically. And the inability for them to break out cleanly, to use that transition game and their speed, I think was really what hemmed the St. Cloud State Huskies from really getting anything going after that. And then, as you mentioned, officiating, we'll call it, no officiating crew is ever going to be perfect. We know that. But again, UMass, that's a hell of a hockey team, and they absolutely deserve to win that game. But I also want to make one other point, because you brought it up too, for Huskies fans. This program took a step forward this weekend. This is a absolutely devastating loss, but let's go back again, like you said, to the summertime and even to December, when we were thinking, where was this team really going to realistically be, right? We thought 3rd, 4th team, they may become a bubble team. Do we see them as a deep playoff contender? At that point, probably not. And to just be coming back from downtown Pittsburgh after a heartbreaking loss in the national championship game, there's nothing to hold your head down about this hockey team. There just isn't. And I know that, at least from my perspective, Noah, what stings more is that, and I wrote about this too, is that, if the Huskies lose 3-2 in overtime, I think it's different. Honestly, I think it's the fact that it was such a lopsided win on the score sheet. Now, I think you and I would agree that it wasn't quite as widespread as the score would indicate.
Yep.
But again, there's a lot of fans that just look at that surface 5-0 and they say we weren't even in the game. And to a point, it was a tough climb. But to me, I feel like what set up that score was a lot of Huskies shooting themselves in the foot on occasions, and UMass taking advantage of it.
Yeah. I think the thing, and I tweeted this yesterday too, is that, all the guys in the studio and all the big Hockey East boys, there's nothing wrong with Hockey East, but they feel vindicated, right? They feel vindicated that a UMass team, a Massachusetts team won in this sort of thing. And again, congratulations to Massachusetts. UMass, I think on paper, UMass was the better team, and the Huskies needed to come out and really kind of earn a bounce there. One thing that this game actually reminded me of, do you remember Game 7 of I believe it was the 2019 Stanley Cup Final, Blues versus Boston in TD Garden, right? And the Blues come away. I think it was 2-0 after the first, because they buried with like 27 seconds left. This game was almost a spitting image of that first period, because if you remember, Boston, speaking of Massachusetts teams, was all over St. Louis through the first 15 minutes of that period, and they could not buy a goal. And then all of a sudden, St. Louis came back and popped a couple right away in that period. And then the train just really started rolling, and St. Louis never looked back. That's kind of what this reminded me of, is that UMass just survived the first 10 minutes, got their legs under them, and was able to kind of get to their style and had a couple of bounces, to go along with that. The other thing is this, even if it's, a 2 or 3 goal game, if we replay this night any other night, St. Cloud State scores. This is, if I'm not mistaken, I believe it was the only time this year that St. Cloud was shut out, because they were down 2-0 against Western in the pod and scored with 27 seconds left with Nick Perbix. So correct me if I'm wrong. I haven't pulled up the schedule because I've been a little depressed about it. But, St. Cloud State in 3 out of their 4 NCAA games scored 15 goals, right? Their goals for average entering that game was 5 in the tournament. It's like, the offense just couldn't find a way. Everyone talks about, Philip Lindbergh, a Minnesota Wild draft pick for UMass, had a great game. I don't know that he was as lights out as people want to make him to be, simply because the Huskies just didn't get a chance to threaten a little bit.
Huskies were shut out first time against Omaha in the pod.
That's right.
2-0.
That's who it was.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
That was the only other time, I believe.
Right. Yeah. And that was one of those games. It wasn't do you have the score sheet in front of you by chance? If you can pull it up.
I can pull it up.
Was it a clean 2-0 game or like a 1-0 game? Because I think that makes a difference where it's like,
I believe it was a clean 2-0 because I remember calling that for KBSC, and yep, it was clean 2-0. It
Right,
was
okay.
1 goal in the first, 1 goal in the second.
Right, exactly. What I meant by that, for those who are wondering, a clean 2-0 versus a 1-0 game with an empty net, where it is a one-shot contest. But yeah, like you mentioned for this program, St. Cloud State, leaps and bounds forwards from being an unranked team to coming to this point and doing so many things for this university that have never been done before. And again, we've talked about it so much. This group really relished that underdog role. And I think that a moment that really stuck out for me last night was before that fourth goal, that too many men on the ice call when the official comes over and talks to Brett Larson. And kudos to Brett Larson, what he's done with this program, but just his ability to stay calm and composed in that moment. That too many men call that was a little bit weak. The official comes over and says, "This is what I saw," and Brett just said, "Okay," and he turned around, and you just knew with the body language. And this is like not a criticism of Brett. You could just see with the body language that you just knew it wasn't St. Cloud State's night. There's just some games that you look and you just say, it's just not our night. We're just not going to get those bounces. Sometimes they happen in game 1 of the regular season. Sometimes they happen in game 31 in the national championship game, right? But talking about this program, talking about this group, so many great storylines, so many players that really grew and developed throughout the season. One of my favorite storylines, and I think just because by nature of the position, he gets so much criticism, even from us at times, and knowing what he's capable of, is that David Renick, in the last month and a half of the season, turned out to be the goaltender that we were expecting and more. He was, he had maybe one tough goal, I think, yesterday, but other than that, he was really rock solid. I think the last goal I remember that was really tough from him was probably the CC goal in the opener of the NCHC playoffs. So, Nick, who are the guys that really you thought, stuck out to you? I think Nolan Walker would be another guy that we really hoped would jump, and boy, I don't know if he jumped or if he scaled a mountain this year, but what a finish to the season he had.
He lit a rocket, essentially, is what he did. Nolan Walker, and he was named as one of the most outstanding forwards of the tournament by chance, was Nolan Walker. To me, he was probably the most improved player on this roster without a question. And it's funny when you look at, especially from the response of his sophomore year, right? His sophomore year, it was not a great season for him numbers wise. And you can either do two things. You can either, you can sit there and you can relish in it, or you can use it as motivation. And for Nolan Walker, holy buckets, did he ever turn it around? And what an opportunity for a senior season if he returns, right? So now we're in the off season. That's going to be a conversation I think we have at a later time there, Noah. But I think Nolan Walker for me, Nick Perbix for the most part to me was also a player I thought really, just because of who he was paired with and Seamus Donahue, he really was able to find that offensive side of his game that he really wasn't able to really shine with, because he was paired with a Jack Ashawn for the first couple of years of his career, and so allowing him to be able to step into that role and to really be that two-way defenseman that he always wanted to be, I think was big. So those two players, at least in itself, stuck out for me, at least on that. But I think also Yami Kranila, Zach Okabe, especially later on. I think Zach Okabe is one of the few bright spots from last game. And you can see that Zach Okabe is starting to feel some swagger in his game, because he's attacking with speed, and he's got a hell of a shot too. And so those are the four names. And granted, I feel bad because, you could say a really good story about a lot of players on the squad, and I don't want to leave anybody off the score sheet, but, as far as most improved or most growth in the players, those are the four that I feel like, at least in my mind, stick out to me.
Yeah. I think one of the storylines that I really liked, and especially kind of by nature in the regional. We see this a lot in the Stanley Cup playoffs over the course of 8 weeks as well. As your stars, you hope that they're going to show up. You wait and see. But the bottom 6 guys are the guys that really kind of make a difference as far as this is concerned here. So, guys like your Will Hammers, which I know ESPN touched on them quite a bit, but Will Hammers, Kyler Kupka, Joey Molinar jumping into the lineup and having one heck of a tournament. Guys like that there's something to be said for players that are willing to play the role that they're in on that specific night, right? If you move Will Hammer up to the first line or you move Will Hammer down to the fourth line, he knows what's expected of him and he's going to play that game. And I think that this group does such a good job of, not that there are any egos on the team, but just really relishing in their identity of saying, yeah, I might only play 8 minutes tonight, but those 8 minutes are going to be hard minutes. And whoever the heck is the defenseman on the opposite side, they're going to get hit every time they go for a puck down in the corner. And just that growth mindset that this group has had, I think it was just really enlightening to see how far they've come. And like you mentioned, Nick, we predicted them to finish 4th, maybe 3rd in the NCHC this year. And maybe dark horse their way through the NCHC playoffs into making the tournament. We actually didn't pick them to come out of the field of 16. And if we did, we said they were going to be on the very back end as maybe the team like Omaha, who was the last team to jump into the tournament there. So like you mentioned, to be in a national championship game, we did the math, right? This program's been around for 92 years, over 34,000 days, and this is the first time they played in a national championship game in Division I or Division III history. I mean, what a moment this has been for this group. And in some ways, the loss means that there's another St. Cloud State group in the future out there that has a bar that's even higher, that has another chance to continue to climb that ladder, if you will, and get up to the next rung there. Nick,
I'm glad you mentioned that, Noah, because I don't want to cut you off, but after that game, former Husky, we had the opportunity to interview Brett Hedican, made a very, very solid point, which is, sometimes, and UMass is actually the pinnacle of what he said. He goes, sometimes you have to go and lose a game of that to know how to win it. And I think, honestly, at this point, you have to look at it as a growth opportunity. And it's like, okay, and I think almost a 5-0 one is going to be just extra, fuel for the fire for the guys that are returning. Honestly, obviously bounces here and there. We've already touched on the game, but inside of a player, there's always that part of you that says, I could have done more. There's always that internal fire too, right? You better darn well know that not only for this group, but for the players that will be returning next season, that's going to be right here. And that's going to be driving them to get back to that same game, and even more so try to do a little bit better performance and try to take home hardware next year. So it's a good thing, right? And again, it's a big moment. I don't think, in my personal opinion, that the Huskies were really ever affected by the big stage in this. To me, it was just you could call it a comedy of dominoes that just didn't fall their way. Again, the hockey gods, they gave the bounces to UMass last night, and it was not the Huskies' time just yet.
So let's talk about, actually, you want a perfect template for a team that, makes their first NCAA tournament, makes their first NCAA championship game, doesn't have the result they're looking for in the championship game, turns around and wins a national championship. Hey, Nick, which team would fit the bill and fit the mold? And that would be a team that we actually saw last night in UMass, right? National championship game a couple of years ago against Duluth. They've been through this heartbreak. Their program has been through that. They were, where St. Cloud State was last night. They were there, I believe it was 2 years ago, off of the second national championship in a row for Duluth. The very last one, actually, they've appeared, I think, in back-to-back ones, if I'm not mistaken. I could have that wrong. Again, I haven't looked. But, I mean, in a recent national championship game and coming back and finding a way to revise the template, finding a way to tweak it, and getting back to this moment. I think the question is, and it's obviously very premature the day after here, but when they go back to the drawing board, Brett Larson and his coaching staff will say, how can we get these boys back to this moment? How do we get back to this hockey game? That's the big question here is, you look around at teams that arguably were better on paper, right? North Dakota, really glad that they were out when they were out. They were a deadly hockey team. Let's be honest here. We've seen very good teams falter in these one and dones. How do you keep the mental and physical emotion and responsibility in check to get through 3 games in the NCAAs to get to that point? And how do you put a season together before that to get there? And I think that they've got a great template to start with this year, and realizing that it doesn't have to be the most skilled group in history, but it has to be a tight-knit group and a group that's willing to grow and learn like this group did this year. So Nick, I kind of wanted to ask you that. What are some of the storylines or some of the highlight points from this St. Cloud State group that you saw over the course of the year that got them to this moment? Because I think, as excited as we were for Huskies hockey, if you looked at this group, like we mentioned on day one, they were not this group that was going to be here. They were molded into the group that was going to be here. So what did you see, as far as the hand shaping the clay that allowed this to happen?
Sure. I think the first one that struck me was the 4-3 overtime win against Colorado College in the pod. You're down 3-0. You could say they came out a little bit slow against CC, maybe slightly overlooking them just because they're fresh off of, had not been in the pod originally as they were scheduled. And they find a way to bounce back. And to me, that was the big storyline with this group, is that they just seem to find a way to battle through all that adversity. Again, down a goal, we mentioned this last show, against BC and BU. And then having to come back again in the third period against Mankato, right? It just didn't seem like this group really just ever took those types of moments and just let it get through their head. So to me, that was the big, and we talked about it last week again, the mental resiliency of this group was, to me, what got them to where they were. Now, are they missing a couple of things? Sure. Did it not help? Certainly, that their number one goal scorer, Easton Brodzinski, was out with an injury. Of course not. And again, that's going to be a big what if. What would have been different if he was in the lineup? We don't know. And at the end of it, it doesn't matter, right? It's just you have to work with what you got. But I mean, think about this. This team was without their leading goal scorer in the national semis, still won 4-1. There were players that stepped up. You talked about Molnar, talked about Will Hammer, pocketing a goal in the semifinals. Kyler Kupka. This team just found the depth at times they needed it. It just seems like they didn't have any cards left in the stack come the national championship time. But when the cards do return next year, Noah, that's going to be a game they want to get back to. And you darn know that the mentality and that game shape, that competitiveness is going to be there for it. So
yeah, and you look at the UMass team that beat them; they were in the same situation, right? The semifinal game of the Frozen Four, they were without 4 bodies, right? So I mean, it's obviously one of them was a backup goaltender, but nonetheless, they found a way to respond and get the job done against a team that was trying to repeat and held the national tournament title for like over 1,000 days, up until that point. So it's just, when I sat back, went for a late night drive last night, I was watching some old time movies. I first watched Major League because I needed a little bit of a laugh. I needed something to kind of pick me up a little bit.
It's a good movie.
Yeah. And then I was kind of, I actually watched last night. I don't know if anyone's seen, this is an old school movie, but have you ever seen the movie 12 Angry Men from 1957? You ever seen that one? I got to repeat it again there.
Which one? I'm sorry.
12 Angry Men, 1957. Yeah. Have you ever seen that movie?
Yes.
That's one heck of a great movie. That's one heck of a flick. I was watching some old school films. I was watching a couple old Westerns as well, just to kind of take my mind off of it. And I know it sounds simple, but I just kind of went to myself, all this fuss over a 3-inch rubber disc and a little bit of frozen water, right? Sometimes just taking stock and sitting back and thinking about, like you mentioned, there might be some guys that are leaving. That could be, for example, Kevin Fitzgerald's last game. There's a guy that we talked about that, might be done, or, maybe he has the chance to come back. I thought he was a factor in last night's game as well, kind of, trying to get the boys sparked and that sort of thing. And I really like the season he had. And, I think that's the hardest part of this, is knowing that, if a guy like Kevin doesn't come back, it's, it's fun to watch him play, but I'm not going to miss what Kevin did on the ice. I'm going to miss who Kevin Fitzgerald was as a person. I'm going to miss what he brought to the rink every night. I'm going to miss what he brought as far as, his energy level with the boys. And, when we got to see him in media, it's stuff like that makes this so difficult, is that, that for some of these guys, this is the end of the line. And for this group, and speaking of a guy like Kevin Fitzgerald and some of these older seniors, to go through 2.5 years ago, arguably the lowest point in St. Cloud hockey history as far as expectations to results, and get to arguably the pinnacle right now of St. Cloud State hockey for expectation to results. I mean, what more can you say about this group? And someone kind of commented about the post-game pressers and having the losing team that does the post-game pressers, and they can be kind of difficult to watch, but I think they're so important because you just realize, the human aspect that goes behind this. It's so easy for us, we're so privileged to cover this sport, but it's so easy sometimes for us to dissect the X's and O's that at the end of the day, it's just so important for us to step back and say, these are just kids. They're kids, that are my age, wearing the sweaters and stuff. And, I couldn't be more proud of this group. And it's almost difficult to put into words because I don't want to be all sappy with it, but at the same time, I want to give them their credit and their due. So Nick, if you kind of had to, kind of talk about this group and what they meant to this program and what they meant to our show, for sure, for giving us this opportunity. I mean, what would you say to this group as far as that's concerned?
Well, first of all, one hell of a season, right? Like you said, it's very difficult to really pin the exact words down, but it's one of those where I think, and I think Brett Larson said it. I know Nick Oliver said it when he was with us before this last weekend, which is this team was close. You could see it, you always look at championship teams, whether it's the pro level, the semi-pro level, and one constant that always seems to be there is that every player on that roster, whether it's 20 players in a hockey squad or 55 or 56 players on a football roster, or however big they are, they all are in it together. They're all buying it. They're all working for each other. And they're all destined and they're focused on one goal, right? And to me, that team bought into Brett Larson. They bought into each other, and they trusted each other. They never let the lows get low. They never let the highs get high. And they just kept putting their foot down and going to work every single day. And if there's one thing I don't think we've really touched on yet is, as I should say enough, is holy hell, what a coaching staff.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, seriously, Shayak, the addition of him after the departure of Mike Gibbons, who'd been with the program for so long, but then Nick Oliver, obviously. I mean, this coaching staff has this team prepared night in and night out. They do their homework. They know how to get these players to buy in. And if there's probably the biggest bright spot there is, yeah, you lose a game like this, but what does that say about players that are in juniors or maybe uncommitted or high school players that look at this and, you watch this team do what they do and they go, okay, maybe instead of going to those guys or these guys, I want to go play for these guys. And, it's that next wave of talent, right? Is that, and that's part of that next step, right? Well, how do we get over the hump now? You're going to have guys come in like Jack Pert, Mr. Hockey Award winner, is coming to St. Cloud as a defenseman. You're going to have, I think, Mason Salmquist come in. So you're going to have guys that are looking at this roster and going, holy hell, these guys just came that close to winning a national title. I want to come in prepared. So does it mean that they work out that much harder in the summer? Does that mean they study the X's and O's with the coaching staff? Yeah, damn right it does. And does it kind of thwart what the senior class might decide to do? It's possible, right? So unless the NHL calls, which we know there's going to be NHL players getting calls, I know that for a fact. When you're that close, sometimes you want to give it one more shot. We saw that with Jimmy Schultz, right? He had every opportunity to leave before the 2018-19 season, and he decided to give it one more shot. And, we all know what happened there. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens. And you also get departures, right? We saw Blake Lizotte, sign with the Kings after that as well. So there's a lot of things that can happen. But at the end of it, it's all positive. That's the thing, is that this is a positive thing. When you take that next step, you don't always get the results you're looking for, but you're going to learn a lot of things along the way. And you're going to know for next time you come around to get there, what it took to get there. And number two, now probably more than not what it takes to finally win that next step. And that's where the Huskies are. They're right on the doorstep to being a really, really, really fantastic program and marking history here at St. Cloud.
Yeah, and you talk about, how hard it is to, I love the phrase, right? It sounds like the NHL, how hard it is to win in this league. But in a sense, it is. Let's take a look at the coaching staff, right? A guy like Brett Larson. Brett Larson, correct me if I'm wrong, is 2-2 in championship games as far as the NCAA is concerned. Wins in 2011, loses in 17, wins in 18, and then loses, obviously, last night. And you talk about like Brett Larson. If you don't want to play for a guy like Brett Larson, you don't play college hockey. I mean, you will not find a better coach. And a guy like Dave Shayak, we mentioned it, in the middle of the game when the Huskies were down 3-0. The last team to claw their way back from a three goal deficit and win a national title, Dave Shayak, 1991, Northern Michigan. Nick Oliver has had that experience in 2013 where he talked about it when we had him on last week, learning those lessons about, they let the game unfortunately get away from them in the first period of the first game. And think about how well prepared this Huskies team was on Thursday and, pushing their way through. And what an absolutely beautiful tip by Nolan Walker. I still can't believe it. It's funny to think about. Maybe this is kind of an interesting little topic, Nick. Do you have like a goal of the year that sticks out for you in your mind? Because Nolan Walker had a 4-goal night at the Herbrooks National Hockey Center. He had the most insanely bizarre flip pass I've ever seen to Micah Miller. He had the beautiful redirect. Was there like a goal or a save or a specific play or a handful of things that, really kind of stuck out to you? Is there one that's popped into your mind that you kind of said, wow, that was just something, or maybe if it's just a moment that really
There's
stuck
two
out
of
to
them,
you?
actually. Number one, the power play marker, Easton Brodzinski in the pot against North Dakota. That beautiful tic-tac-toe play was pretty gorgeous.
Yeah.
But going back to Nolan Walker in that 4-goal game where he had the patience to walk around and tuck it back in while he was behind the goal line. So basically Nolan Walker has 3 of the 4.
Yeah.
But I mean, and again, we complimented him already as, at least I said, most improved player and speaks for herself. And, it was one change to him, right? And Brett Larson said, I want to be more selfish. And it's funny how sometimes being more selfish means you're contributing more to the team aspect of it because you're actually starting to put up some of the offensive numbers that you were missing the season before.
Yeah. Actually one of my favorite goals in the year, we're going to go back a little ways. Goal number 1 of the season. I loved Kevin Fitzgerald's move on that little forehand backhand chip. I always love that move, kind of the Mikko Koivu thing on the breakaway there. I like that. It just kind of is like one of those things where, you know how it is every year, especially with Huskies hockey. It's like, what are we going to get? What's the product that we're going to expect? And Kevin Fitzgerald, 3 minutes into the game, boom, pots the marker at 1-0. And it's like, maybe that's a good question too, Nick, is as you can tell, this is totally off the cuff for us here. Was there a moment, as we talked about this team, even at Christmas time, we didn't know where they were going to end up. Was there a moment where in your mind you truly said, the switch flipped and you truly said, this team is a national championship contender? Was there ever that moment in your mind, or did you continue to be convinced as the train went along? I think for myself, you go through, they had a really nice NCHC playoff besides the little 5 minutes against North Dakota. And it was kind of like, I don't want to say it came out of left field, but it was all the things that we had talked about coming together there, right? You go, 2 weeks prior, they get blasted up at Amsoil Arena in Duluth. They did not show up for that hockey game. They come back. They have the best start of their season, still, I would say, the entire year. Claw their way a 3-0 lead against Duluth, and then almost self-implode in the last 40 minutes, and then find a way in OT, which that OT win I thought was a great transition into the NCHC tournament. My turning point was actually the game against Colorado College. When I watched that team put 77 shot attempts up, and it was a 1-1 hockey game, and they were down for, a portion of it as well. And there was no bend and no break in that group. We talk about Duluth all the time, these veteran teams, right, that find a way to, stay calm, stay composed, not look like they're panicking at all. That was the first time all year that I just looked at this group and I was like, they are not rattled by this at all. Like, they are not phased. Were they going to be a tournament team at that point, even if they lost? Probably. But they stayed so composed against Duluth the next night. They stayed so composed. They learned their lessons from the North Dakota loss. They came out flying in the BU game. They dropped the first goal of the game in that game. Come back in a decisive fashion and a 6-2 win. Next night, really poor start against BC, dropping the first goal in that game, right? Easton Brodzinski gets hurt, and all of a sudden the switch flips again. Mankato, they jump out to a great lead in that game, almost kind of have that little bit of adversity that pushes them back, and found a way to claw through. And I thought that CC game was just not really a physical turning point, but a mental turning point where I don't know if I said they could win a national championship, but that was where I said, this team has this sneaky dark horse potential to shock a lot of people in this tournament if they continue to play the way that they are.
Yeah, I'll take that. To me, getting blasted by Minnesota actually, to me, is what started the train.
Mm-hmm.
We talked about last season. That was, when it was Colorado College again, if I'm not mistaken, swept them in their own building, and it wasn't even close.
Yep.
And it's one of those where there's a turning point, right? Where you're like, okay, and it's different, right? Because last year, different makeup, different team. So you can't really compare apples to apples there. But for this year, up until that point, St. Cloud was playing pretty good hockey. On the flip side of it, though, when you get run out of AmSoil Arena like they did, right? And that team probably played the worst game all season at AmSoil Arena. And at that point, especially when you're heading into the playoffs, right? Or they're approaching, it's like, we know we can be better. We got to go out and respond, right? And then, as you mentioned, that first 20 minutes, the best period of hockey by far we've seen him play.
Yep.
And not just the first period. But like you said, then it just goes into this, okay, so you get the emotions out, right? But it's how you control those emotions when things are going your way, when you're not getting the bounces. And, Colorado College, see what you want, but they're still a college hockey team. They can still beat people on any given night, especially NCHC. We've seen it all too often. And it's that kind of style that CC played under Mike Havlin, which is, essentially they make you beat yourselves, right? That they make you just sort of get frustrated, and then they just sort of take advantage of you just kind of shooting yourself in the foot, right? And as you pointed out, they didn't do that against the Tigers. They eventually would pull away and win that game, but they didn't really change the way they played. They just kept with the game plan. They didn't start to cheat or try to cut corners on their structure offensively, defensively, and they just kind of just rolled with the punches, right? And it's that mental stability that you look for in a championship hockey team. And as you point out, that to me is what really, again, carried them forward into a national title game. It's just unfortunate that, again, as we sit here Sunday afternoon after a very, very long day for myself, and I know a very emotional game for a lot of Huskies fans. But, and I'll say this again, there were a couple, I'm not going to mention the names, but a couple of fans that I know were very emotional about the score of last night's game. And again, would you rather lose 10-0 in the national championship game, or would you rather lose 5-4
in triple overtime?
Triple overtime in the regional against BU.
Yeah.
And that's what it's like. Yeah, this is still progress. Yeah, the ending wasn't pretty, but you can't just look at the score. It doesn't tell you the whole story, right? Like I said, if Mietinen's, and we're always going to wonder if Mietinen's goal or shot is an inch lower and that goes bar down, you do wonder how that game is different from that point on. And I 100% think it would have been. There's no question UMass wasn't going to go away quietly. They never did. They didn't do that against Duluth, but you wonder if St. Cloud would have been able to establish their game that they were actually on already and just continue to let that train roll, right? Because confidence in athletes is everything, right? And VT, for a guy that, is the most dangerous guy with the puck on his stick for the Huskies, was probably didn't have it on his stick enough during those, last two games, especially in that championship game. And there's no question that shot's going to haunt him. If there's any one player that wants redemption, what damn well it's going to be Viti Miettinen.
Yeah, and he's got a lot of time to make it up, hopefully, in a St. Cloud State sweater here. And to your point, Nick, I thought about last night. I thought about, why does this hurt so much? Why am I so frustrated? And again, I guess if you're going to lose, there's always that what if in a 5-0 score. Do you feel like you could do something more? But there's also the flip side of, do you want to be Michigan in 2011 against Duluth, losing in double overtime, right? That one stings even more to know that you're that close, to that point as well. And I thought about it, and it's, how different do we feel if Mankato pops the fifth marker in that 4-4 hockey game? Does it feel a little bit different? I think there's just something about a championship game, knowing that through the stretch of a 31-game season, unfortunately, the dominoes didn't fall your way in game number 31. It wasn't game 22 where we get to come on the show and say, well, the boys got to do this next week or next game. There is no next game, right? This is it. And my last point here, Nick, and if you have anything else to add, definitely think of it and we'll roll with it there. One of the things that was so difficult for me about this, not only for St. Cloud State program history, we know the NCHC is a good league unless you ask Barry Melrose. But it's actually, I'm actually going to go to John Buccigross and Barry Melrose. I actually thought Colby Cohen, I didn't mind his analysis. I know you were at the game, so you really didn't get a chance to listen, but Colby Cohen, I thought, offered some pretty decent tidbits as far as like players and young players to watch things are concerned. I thought he offered some constructive things. And I know, Barry Melrose isn't a hockey guy. Let's just be real. He's not a college hockey guy. Not a hockey guy. He's not a college hockey guy, but, and John Buccigross, he's a Hockey East guy. That's fine. And I'm not here to blast them or anything, but I think when you take that crew that was on there, plus the crew in the studio, who are predominantly Hockey East guys, I think the thing that really made this bite even more is that St. Cloud, especially through the tournament, flew so under the radar of so many people, right? They were unranked at the beginning of the year. The NCHC playoffs, they said, oh, I can't wait to watch St. Cloud choke in the NCHC playoffs. They're going to lose to Colorado College. It was, oh, here we go again, and it was 1-0 and 1-1. And why are we playing the Tigers so close? And St. Cloud outscores their opponents 10-3 in the regional game. They get to Mankato, and they find a way to beat arguably the third or fourth best team in the country. And unfortunately, the train just didn't get to the end of the station. And I think that's, for me, what's so difficult is that, like I said, all the quote unquote experts feel so vindicated about this because UMass won and, oh, UMass was a better team. And you listen to the intro of the show and it was St. Cloud didn't even deserve to be on the same ice as this UMass team, even in the pregame. And unfortunately, the result makes a lot of these experts feel, oh, well, look, 5-0. St. Cloud never had a chance. St. Cloud was never in this hockey game. And it's just, that's the part that just gets me the most. It's like this team on any other given night would have been right in that hockey game, if not winning that game. And Nick, I don't know if this is just me being emotional and kind of just running with whatever here, but I think that's, for me, is, if you met a fan, a UMass fan or a BU or a BC fan, and they said, oh, well, clearly the NCHC couldn't handle Hockey East this year. Clearly St. Cloud State, I can't even believe they got to the national championship game. What would you say to an expert or a fan like that, if they had 10 picks to make throughout the NCAA tournament and they didn't pick St. Cloud for any of the 10 picks in the games that the Huskies played, what would you say to them about this program, in response to that?
I have a few words. First of all, bleep you, number one.
Thank you.
But number two, these guys don't watch NCHC hockey. Remember, we're in flyover country. We're just these guys from good old Farmville that, go out, behind on the frozen ponds, and they maybe do some good things. But, when they get to the East Coast, these boys are, up and they're the straddling young lads, and you get where I'm going with this. Anyway, so at the end of the day, I don't care what they say. I don't. Especially when they don't follow these teams both as closely as other people do. And I'm not trying to blast other people, but I'm not going to sit there and criticize on the Hockey East team, especially if I haven't watched them. Now, when I watched UMass against UMD, I was very, very impressed with how UMass ended it. Great hockey team. And again, let's repeat this again. UMass deserved to win that game, and they are every more deserving than any other program to win a national champion for the first time, right? So again, we're not taking that away from them. On the second thing, you can't say that, but also say that a team doesn't earn their way into a national championship game. So it's the same way why UMD lost in the semifinals to UMass down people because of contact tracing. You can't have it both ways, in my opinion. So at the end of it, here's what you say. And as a player, this, like, there's going to be people in the media who are so-called experts. That's not us. But that tend to maybe show a little hometown bias, and that's fine. At the end of it, they're not the ones that are pulling up the skates. They're not the ones that are in, the pre-games. They're not the ones drawing up the X's and O's. They're not the ones that are practicing hours a day and then having to go to class, and they got full schedules. It's the kids on both rosters that make these happen, right? So they can say where the hell they want, in my opinion. It's, what team shows up in any given night. And again, we said it before, and I think after this, I think we can put this kind of, to bed a little bit, because I think we kind of beat the dead horse enough. But both teams earned their right to be there last night. And I said this last night too, kind of towards the tail end of the third, and that is St. Cloud State just picked not the greatest night to have their worst night of the season. Honestly, and that's really what it was. Couple bad bounces. UMass gets a couple of good breaks, and on paper, were they probably the better team statistically? Sure. But you still got to go out and win the hockey game, right? And they did. The mistakes the Huskies made, they capitalized. For the Huskies on special teams, and when they had a couple opportunities, didn't quite, unfortunately, get the looks they were hoping for. But it isn't the one-all be-all, right? And yeah, you feel for some of the seniors, and maybe there's underclassmen too that might be getting a phone call. You never know. You have to mention that, but it's over and done with. And UMass earned that championship, and St. Cloud earned that right to battle for them there. And again, the 5-0 doesn't tell the whole story, and it never really does. And for folks who watch that game, it should, because again, after 3-0, as a coach in the last game of the season, you're going to start to take some risks. You're going to start to activate your D. It's not a great formula for success, because that by being that aggressive, you're going to probably end up giving up some chances the other way with just one bounce or one breakout off the glass. But don't sit here and tell me that St. Cloud wasn't supposed to be there. Don't, because I will be happy to debate you on that topic, especially coming out of the best conference in college hockey to me, up and down the NCHC, which to me in itself prepares any team out of that league to go deep into the postseason, which is how much playoff hockey they play from essentially the start of the conference schedule. So for everybody that's out there in Hockey East, welcome. I'll take you on that anytime. Yeah. But to end it, great season for the Huskies. Huskies and the players have nothing to hang their heads about. They accomplished things that nobody else has ever done. And now it's, how do we climb that last step and get to the top of the mountain?
Yep. Last time I checked, there was only one league that had two teams in the Frozen Four, and that was the NJQHL and the NORPAC Tier 3. So that's the best league in college basketball. So we're actually going to move into the Huskies Illustrated Weekly Roundup. I do want to mention to fans, we're going to go through the Huskies Illustrated Weekly Roundup, and then we're going to spend just 5 minutes on a quick little topic here related to Minnesota hockey, and that is both the Hobey Baker Award and the Richter Award. We're going to spend some time on that, of course, because it involves teams that are close in our neck of the woods. So without further ado, the Huskies Illustrated Weekly Roundup.
Center Ice View News and Notes. Center Ice View provides you with the best coverage of St. Cloud State Huskies hockey, from game notes, recaps, photos, and more. Go to centericeview.com.
And no, speaking of the Hobey Baker, Cole Caulfield did indeed take home the Hobey Baker Award for this year. He also scored his first professional goal with Laval, which is the minor league affiliate of the Montreal Canadiens. Minnesota goaltender Jack LaFontaine is the recipient of the Mike Richter Award, who edged out Dryden McKay of Mankato for that award as the best netminder in the NCAA. In college signings, the Wild did ink Matt Boley to his first entry-level deal with Boston College, and actually paired both a goal and assist in his pro debut here with the Iowa Wild.
Yeah, gotta love it. Moving into up north here, the city of Humboldt, Saskatchewan has announced plans to open a $25 million tribute center to permanently commemorate the 16 lives lost and 13 injured in a fatal bus crash back in 2018. The building will feature a gallery honoring the victims of the crash, as well as an arena and a fitness and physiotherapy area. The city said construction will not begin for at least a couple of years, according to the Canadian press.
The Buffalo Sabres got a record, but not one that they're going to be proud of, as they matched the NHL record with 18 straight losses, essentially, which would tie the 2003 Pittsburgh Penguins after they blew a 3-goal third period lead, and which unfortunately they did snap that the following game against the Philadelphia Flyers, who it's kind of an interesting team to know, but we're not going to get too much into it. But if there's one team that isn't looking so hot as we're in the States, the Philadelphia Flyers, but Buffalo finally able to get a win under the belt at the expense of the Flyers.
Well, that's just how good the Hockey East is, right, Nick? Anyway, Toronto, speaking of sticking out east up north again, wow, that's a lot of directions there, Dick. That would be northeast for those who are keeping track there. Toronto goalie Jack Campbell set a new NHL record with his 11th consecutive win of the season over Ottawa last night, which was previously 10 straight wins to start a season by Montreal's Carey Price in 2016-17. Campbell is 11-0. Out west, Patrick Marleau did pass Mark Messier for second most games played in NHL history with 1,757 just 2 weeks ago, and he's currently 5 games away from breaking Gordie Howe's record of all time of 1,767 career games played.
And second to last here, a couple of NHL transactions. Vancouver did extend to Thatcher Demko, 5 years, $5 million. They also inked for Tanner Pearson to 3 years, $3.25 million, I believe. It was $9.75 million, I believe that was on the docket there. Yep. Big trade also in NHL news. Kyle Palmieri and former North Dakota Fighting Hawk Travis Zajac heading to the Islanders for a first-round pick, 2 prospects, and a 4th-round selection. Lucas Wallmark and a prospect went to Florida for Brett Connolly, Riley Stillman, and his 7th-round pick, and former Denver University standout Henrik Borgstrom. Riley Nash was dealt from Columbus to Toronto, and former Minnesota Wild netminder Devin Dubnyk was flipped for a former Minnesota Wild defenseman in Greg Patterin to the Colorado Avalanche, both those guys switching spots.
And lastly, Nick, in a quick little injury tidbit here, Columbus's Boone Jenner will miss the year, with a broken finger. Montreal's Brendan Gallagher is in a similar boat on long-term injured reserve for 6 weeks with a fractured thumb. And Winnipeg's Blake Wheeler is out for at least a week with a concussion. And to kind of finish off the show here, Nick, we want to talk about the first story that was in the Huskies Illustrated Weekly Roundup. First, the Hobey Baker Award winner going to Cole Caulfield. I don't think there's any surprise there. I don't have anybody that was on that list, but that would have edged him out. But speaking of the Hobey Baker, you did have a top 3 finalist in Dryden McKay, who somehow was edged out by the University of Minnesota's Jack LaFontaine. I think it surprised a lot of people in the hockey world, myself included. So to start off, I just want to say very quickly, not taking anything away, if I can say it clearly, from Jack LaFontaine. He's one heck of a goaltender. Don't get me wrong. He had a very good season for Minnesota. I think he faltered a little bit in the postseason, but I thought, if you would have maybe given the award at the end of the regular season, I think Jack LaFontaine had a little bit, more of a case than he had when they did the voting. I still think Dryden McKay was the better goaltender, but I thought, at that particular point, Jack LaFontaine was more in the mix at that point than actually when the voting happened. And I don't know if they took that into consideration and kind of maybe said like, oh, if you have a guy like Zach Driscoll who doesn't make it to the Frozen Four, he, this and that versus Dryden McKay, I don't know. So, but let's be honest, Nick, is Dryden McKay the recipient of that award after posting back-to-back seasons with 10 shutouts in a season? And is that close to breaking Ryan Miller's all-time collegiate shutout streak?
How is he not?
Yeah,
I think is the better question. And again, it does not take away the wonderful season Jack LaFontaine had at Minnesota. It's not diminishing what he's doing. It's more of, but the problem is with that award, right? It's every year. So you can't go back 2 years and say, oh, he had back-to-back shutout 10 plus in a season. From some of the comments I was reading, and that is some of the voting, and I'm not sure if this is coming from the people who voted, it sounded like strength of schedule was kind of a determining factor for some of the people that voted. I want to know what they were drinking when they saw this. Because here's the thing, right? And yeah, I think it's hard, right? I think both those goaltenders played really, really well, right? So what is the difference maker? And it seems like the voting committee went to what were those opponents like that they each played, right? Because it's one thing to have 10 shutouts in the season if you're playing Alabama Huntsville 5 or 6 times, right? That's one thing. I think that's a fair assessment.
Yep.
Not taking away from them, just in terms of recent success, right?
Yep.
On the second part is, how much different really is the Big Ten and the WCHA? I don't know. And at the end of it, these are the awards where there's so much subjectivity. And I think what makes this so weird is, how is Dryden McKay a hat trick finalist? So he's supposedly one of the best 3 college hockey players just in general, not just by his position. So if that's the case, does that automatically mean he should be the Mike Richter Award? Not necessarily, but I think there's a lot of people reading into that. And at the end of the day, yeah, to me, on paper, it really doesn't make sense. I'm with you. I think Dryden McKay should have gotten the award. But again, congrats to Jack LaFontaine. Still had a fantastic season. But I can see where there's some mixed messaging that's being sent when you present 3 of the so-called best college hockey players, and then one of those 3 is up for a position-based award. It doesn't receive that. That's kind of weird in terms of just the communication of that, I suppose you could say. I think that's why people are so kind of off about it, in my opinion.
Yeah, Jack LaFontaine in his senior year, actually coming back for a 5th year from all the reports that I've seen for the University of Minnesota. Of course, Jared Moe going to Wisconsin, I believe, is the backup netminder at Minnesota there. And I wonder, given Dryden McKay's recent success, I wonder if the committee was saying, and I don't want to speculate here too much, but maybe thinking maybe Jack LaFontaine doesn't have the repeat success he had this year, and Dryden McKay with his consistency does, and is the winner next year in that, based on his body of performance there. Granted, yes, it's a season by season award. You're not supposed to take those things into account, but I would have a hard time believing if Dryden McKay falls off a cliff next year. Also, talking about that Mankato group, number one, congratulations to their program for getting, their first 2 NCAA tournament wins in school history and almost getting their 3rd. And if you want to talk about a team, comparative to a team like North Dakota, who is pretty much being gutted from the inside out right now, that Mankato team has a legitimate chance to win a national championship next year. They are not going to lose much. They're a veteran, experienced, hard, heavy team with a very good goaltender. Boy, they're going to be a really deadly group next year. And it's, the first time that all 5 Minnesota teams, make the NCAA tournament. And you just talk about, Nick, I think you're going to love this. I had someone in the great state of North Dakota, a big hockey state, tell me last year, he actually runs a podcast. He said, North Dakota is more of the state of hockey than Minnesota is. So immediately I sat up in my seat, your face. Yeah, you might need a little bit of Jack Daniels in that caribou there, Nick. So I was curious, and I said, enlighten me on your wonderful North Dakotan thinking that you have here. And he said his point was, well, if you go to Grand Forks, their building is sold out every night, and everybody wants to play for North Dakota. And the buildings in Minnesota aren't sold out, which, to be fair, I would say besides maybe Duluth, even the Herbrooks National Hockey Center is not filled every night. That's in its own segment. That is a fair assessment. That is a fair statement. However, when you have almost 100 high school programs that are churning out collegiate and NHL prospects left and right, 5 Division I college hockey programs. What more can you say about the state of Minnesota? I just wanted to bring that up because I was just so flabbergasted that he was like, oh, well, North Dakota, everybody wants to play for North Dakota. The reason people want to play for North Dakota, 1, their program's good. Let's be real. They're a good hockey team. 2, they have a $104 million facility that was $104 million in 2000, plus millions of dollars in a new locker room renovation. So that's part of the reason. Nick, my point is this, what makes Minnesota and the state of hockey so successful right now at the collegiate game? And do we see all 5 teams and maybe even the 6th team in St. Thomas contend for an NCAA tournament berth next year?
Yes. Number one, they're getting Rico Blase. We all know that he knows this area. I mean, he was in the NCHC, he was in WCHA. He knows how to recruit. And by the way, he already got one hell of a recruit already in terms of a goaltender. First of all, it goes back even before college. It's the high school programs. Honestly, the development structure in Minnesota is bar none. If I recall, there were 44 Minnesota-born players that played in the Frozen Four. I don't know what the stat with North Dakota was, but I think the next state down was in the single digits, honestly.
Was there even a player from North Dakota? I don't think there was.
I don't even know if there was.
I doubt it. Yeah.
So his definition of straight up hockey is I can fill a building.
Yeah.
But on the second part is okay. But I'm going to counter his point, and I hope he watches this because now he's triggered me. What
I
else?
couldn't tell.
Right. What else does North Dakota have to compete for entertainment value besides going to a North Dakota? I'll be right here. Here's the thing.
I got one team, and that's the NDSU Bison football team. That's it.
But let's even go beyond that, right? So if you're in the Twin Cities, and granted, St. Cloud is a pretty short 45-minute drive, like on most, that's not terrible, right? People from North Dakota, from what I gather, I mean, they were out there in freaking Pittsburgh. They made the drive, and I'm like, dude, the golf course is back that way, 1,400 miles. You missed your turn.
Yeah, and 45 minutes is the closest town between two towns in North Dakota, by the way.
Right. So, but my point is that, you know, in terms of entertainment, you know, if I got disposable income, I can go to Top Golf. I can go to the Gophers if I wanted to. Yeah, I can make a weekend trip and go to a Duluth game. There's different things that are competing for that money, right? And what does North Dakota have besides
Cows?
A hockey program? And I'll even throw on this. Tell me where North Dakota hockey is without Ralph Engelstad. Honestly, because the big draw to them is the facility.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah, seriously. With the money that guy invested in that program and with that facility, granted, that is a world-class facility. And granted, it sells itself, right? And it helps that, yes, you have a two-time winner. Hasn't Brad Berry won the Coach of the Year twice?
Yeah,
I think he has, hasn't he?
Well, the other thing you got to realize too is this. Have you ever heard the story of Ralph Engelstad? Which congratulations to him, for helping out the program. He's kind of a racist dude, man. Like, I mean, you look at some of the things that are a part of that and stuff, and like not that we're trying to open up this, but it's like, everyone is like, oh, look at Ralph Engelstad, creating this great facility. It's like, there's pieces of that facility, especially with the name change, that were put into the marble flooring and into portions of the building for that specific reason. Granted, obviously, I'm expecting he didn't anticipate the name to change, but it's like, are you really saying that North Dakota is more the state of hockey than Minnesota when it's like none of the mascots are offensive? Like,
No, well, and then back to principle, right?
Yes.
It's definition of North Dakota state of hockey is because I can fill an 11,000 seat arena.
Yeah,
that's pretty weak in my opinion. It's like, to me, it's what is the development process? What kind of talent is the state turning out? Last I checked, Minnesota was in that lead for the last 3 or 4 or 5 decades. So come at me, bro.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. But like we were kind of mentioning here, this Mankato group, I think, depending on who St. Cloud State brings back, I think St. Cloud is in that mix too. Mankato, St. Cloud, and Duluth, I think, are the 3 teams that you're looking at right now that are, although Duluth is set to lose a fair number of seniors, so they could be kind of an interesting spot. The transfer portal is going to be really interesting, especially for a team like St. Thomas. Minnesota right now is, when I look at them, they're kind of just that they lost Brandon McManus to Omaha, good pickup for the Mavericks there. They're in kind of a weird ebb and flow state as well as kind of just where they are. They don't strike me as a team that.
They're getting a whole bunch of really good recruits coming, including the Luke and the Middlestat twins too, which are coming on board. One next year and the other one afterwards. Again, Luke and Jake Middlestat, I believe. So
yeah, the problem with Minnesota is that they always have so much turnover. They talk about the young talent that they're trying to develop, and they only hang on to them for 1 or 2 years, and it's just so difficult, I think, for them to kind of like, if you can have guys stay for an extra year, I think it just makes a huge difference for that program.
But North Dakota is the same way. I mean, but their players are gutted because they signed NHL contracts, right? So, and again, you sign up when you're a college entity, that the max you get out of a player is 5 years, right? So that the turnover is going to be there. I think a lot of people were surprised when Blake Lizotte was picked off by the LA Kings. I thought a lot of people did not have him leaving early. I personally thought that, he was going to be there at least one more year, because to me, I saw he had the talent there. I even surprised me a bit that he was even offered, a contract that early. Not the fact that he didn't earn it, but more the fact that, LA was looking at him that closely, which I should know better, because LA seems to have a scout in the building every single day. Yeah. I wouldn't be surprised if they have a scout at practice, honestly.
It certainly hurts, I think, Bemidji to lose Zach Driscoll, though. That's a tough loss for them. But they're a program that I really like their style of play. They actually they're kind of the poor man's version, I think, of UMass a little bit, where their defensive structure is really strong. I think they just need a little bit more of that offensive push. They need a couple of those guys to really step up on that end as well. But Nick, I don't really know where we're going with this. Do you have anything else that you want to add as far as the collegiate hockey world? Anything? I think we'd be remiss if we do say before we join Dave Starman and then take a week off here. From our personal side, and you and I were talking about this on Friday when you were sitting in your hotel in Pittsburgh. Again, 15 months. What an amazing ride that we have had, from covering a team that was kind of a middle of the pack group last year to being where we are at. And we couldn't do it, especially in the beginning stages last summer, without the amazing support of some of these fans that have been able to stick with us and, give us this opportunity to talk about Huskies hockey. Nick, I kind of wanted to kick it to you. I mean, at the end of the season, when you sit back and reflect, is there something for our show specifically that you would want to say to the fans and people who have been with us since the train left the station, or who have jumped on at the various stopping points here?
Not really changes for me, other than just thank you. Honestly, especially with the interaction with a lot of our fans. I think that, to me, is where I get most of my enjoyment. Is, the one thing about the hockey community that I think all of us appreciate, especially those who've been around it, have been in it, is it's such a tight-knit group. And not only that, because it's a lot of it's hockey, but also it's like, hey man, how you doing? It's more than that. It becomes like this kind of second family. Would you feel comfortable, Nick, maybe to kind of give them a shout out for listening to our show? Did you happen to meet someone in particular in Pittsburgh that was kind of a fun little story? Do you feel comfortable telling that on the show? Yeah, I believe it's so. I'll just use the Twitter handle, right? So Power Trip Quotes. I literally walked out of the press elevator. It was in between the St. Cloud game and the UMass Duluth game, and I was really just trying to get some swag, right? I picked up this, and I don't find myself to be the guy that you pick out of a group. You're
pretty good looking.
Yeah, that guy. Depends on the broken mirror status, but. Walked kind of into him and someone else who he was with were wearing jerseys, and I was like, "Good win, eh, boys?" Like, "Oh, hey, listen to your podcast." And what's to say this, Huskies hockey fans? This person works for KFan. So it's not just KFan quotes and some guy like copy and pasting. No, and apparently this guy listens to us on a regular basis. And I think more importantly, I think the biggest compliment he gave us was, when he was at school and going through the process, he's like, I've always kind of wanted, I don't know if a podcast was in his mind at that point, but, just some type of program that really gave the passion about this program. And he's like, that's what you guys are doing. It's awesome. Listen. And I think that's the biggest compliment, is when you have people who, really do enjoy the conversations, whether it's really good days or unfortunately today's it's not the best of days, but we put it together. It is what it is, and thank you to all the fans. Caleb Peabody, dude, he always knows how to make me laugh, so love that guy. But everybody else too. It's been a blast of a season. Couldn't have asked for more. Opportunity to cover a national championship game. You just never know when these opportunities come around again. And again, a big part of that is just the fans that listen to us, and you guys make it very, very special for us to do it.
Yeah, I think at some point here, mostly because I want to see if the voice and the face matches the energy. We got to have Caleb on, I think, at some point during the summer here for at least 10 minutes and just kind of see kind of how he is relative to his Twitter status, I should say. But yes, like you mentioned, we're not here without our fans. And I know this is kind of an interesting time for a fan pump up segment here, but it really is true, because Nick, I think you and I can attest to this a little bit. We've had some moments where I don't want to say we've thought about not doing the show, but where we've said, we're a little bit tired right now. Boy, this is really tough to talk about this. Gosh, I don't really want to talk about this, but it's kind of part of what we do and part of the package. Like you mentioned about good and bad days. And there are some days where fans get a little ornery and it's kind of like, guys, like calm down a little bit. But then there are other days where it's like the fan interaction and how people kind of gravitate to what we do or kind of try to be a part of what we do, or, just a little compliment. Hey, we love your show, or you guys did such a nice job. Derek Felska this morning, kind of giving us our props as long as the Rink Live with Mick Hatton, little things like that. And I don't know if it sounds narcissistic or anything, but it is fuel for the fire. It makes us feel somewhat validated that we are making a difference, in your Monday morning car drive to work, or giving you a little bit of Huskies hockey content that, helps you get through your week and that sort of thing. If we can be a small sliver of the piece of covering Huskies hockey to provide a small sliver into your day of finding Huskies hockey coverage, that's what we hope to do. And we're so excited to start some new things in the train rolling here. One last thing to mention before we get out of here, Nick. Two-line fan trivia. Caleb Peabody actually won his first hat in two-line trivia. The question was about the national championship game. I'm not going to read it because it makes me sad. But season 1 of trivia is done. Brody Falconer was our winner for season 1 of trivia. I also forgot, and we'll have to touch on this, I think, probably in the next show. I did not look to see who was the closest for goal total for the Frozen Four, so I'll definitely have to get on that as well. But I wanted to mention there will be no trivia next week and the week after. So for 2 weeks, we will not have trivia. We might change the format a little bit for season 2 of trivia as well to maybe kind of decrease the eligibility restrictions where if you win, you can't win the next week. The only reason for that was actually because Brody Falconer was winning so much when we first started the thing. So that was kind of why we put that in there to give other people a chance. And now I think we might kind of open up those eligibility rules to see who can really take that leaderboard and really get those questions intact. So Tinner Heath, I know you said you turned your alarms off for the year, but get them fired up in about 3 weeks here, baby, because season 2 of trivia is coming. That will do it for episode number 57 of the Huskies Warming House podcast. For Nick Maxon, I'm Noah Grant, and we will see you next week. We will not see you next week. That's a lie. Nick, I almost had that outro. I almost had it. We will see you in 2 weeks.
Almost had it.
Almost had it. 2 weeks for episode number 58.
One-timer coming, they score! Ripped in! A bomb from Pervix!
So Dana Rasmussen fires and she scores! Dana Rasmussen for the Huskies alongside
Dwayne Kaprizov in for a chance to win it. He scores! Kirill the Thrill is for real. Welcome to the NHL. A game winner.
St. Cloud Cathedral is now 42.6 seconds away from wrapping up the school's first ever title.